Everyone, great to see you all. Hope you are enjoying your Christmas season. I certainly am enjoying the cooler weather, that's for sure. It's wonderful. As we mentioned last week, we kicked off our Christmas series, which we have called Have Yourself a Real Little Christmas. Yes, we want you to have a merry little Christmas, but as we were saying and kind of setting up our series, that merriness is dependent on how you see Christmas, how real Christmas is for you. And we looked last week at how real our culture perceives Christmas, and we looked at it in a variety of ways. We looked at the family-centered reality of Christmas, where Christmas is dependent not just on everyone being together, but hopefully everyone getting on very well together. That either makes or breaks Christmas. Our culture also perceives Christmas purely as a seasonal event. It separates the spiritual and the religious aspect to it, but still to enjoy all of the festival activities like tree lightings and decorations and all the various parties. And then, of course, the main cultural perception driving Christmas is the consumer-centered reality. Stats tell us that Americans begin their Christmas shopping in October, with 63% doing it online. And so, having said that, have a look at these pretty interesting stats that confirm the consumer-centered reality of Christmas. Each second, if you can believe it, Amazon records $4,722. Each minute, those sales amount to $283,000, and then in an hour that averages more than $17 million, and that's not just over Christmas, that's just an average month. And then, of course, most likely in reaction to that, there are some in our culture who take on a humanitarian-centered reality of Christmas. They are repulsed by the monopoly of consumerism, and they try and redeem Christmas by volunteering at soup kitchens and raising funds and raising awareness for various charities and NPOs. But the point of the series, we said, the point of the series is to ask whether we are seeing enough, whether we are understanding enough and believing enough and even feeling enough about Christmas. And we concluded last week that there is a supernatural reality to Christmas. And if we miss that, we will miss out on the true and real meaning of Christmas. And that supernatural reality is the birth of Jesus, who, as the angel told Joseph, came to save us from our sins. And if we see that, and if we believe that, it will completely regenerate us spiritually. And we will begin to experience the peace and the joy promised by Christmas, promised by Jesus. Today we arrive at the next element that is going to make Christmas real for us, and that is our worship. To have a supernatural Christmas means getting our worship right. To have a Christmas that goes beyond merely family and the giving and receiving of gifts and ugly Christmas sweaters and PJs and even good humanitarian deeds, we need to get our worship correct. Correct worship can take our Christmas to a supernatural level where I believe it always should be. And I don't just mean the songs that we sing or the songs that we listen to. There is a supernatural element to Christmas that if it just remains normal, it remains self-centered. And so as we continue the Christmas story that Adam just read for us, we're going to contrast two sets of people. Those whose worship goes to a supernatural level and their lives are forever changed by it, and those whose worship remains self-centered and, in the context of our story, quite destructive. So let's tackle it like this. To have a real Christmas means having supernatural worship, which means three things need to happen. Number one, we need to see the glory of Jesus. Number two, we then need to put off the glory of self. And then lastly, we then need to walk in worshipful obedience. So here we go. The first thing that we need to do is we need to see the glory of Jesus to have supernatural worship and therefore a very real Christmas. And so, there's that saying that says, you are what you eat. And so that's, Christmas time, pies and all sorts of things. But you are what you eat. But I also want to say you are what you worship. You are what you worship. Again, not just what we sing, although singing is one of many ways that we display what we are worshiping. It's one of many types of fruit that displays what we worship on a more fundamental level. And what that fundamental level is what are you glorifying? What are you glorying in? And what we glorify or glory in is what is most valuable to us, is of most worth to us. And what is most worthy to us becomes the very center by which our lives revolve around. And so if that is true, which I believe it is, then we are all worshipers. You can be an atheist and be the most ardent, faithful worshiper. If your Ferrari is of most worth to you, then that is what you will glorify, and your life will center around it. Your life will center around a car. Now, read this quote with me from David Foster Wallace, and then I'll tell you about him. He says this: here's something else that's weird but true. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. He says the only choice we get is what to worship. And the compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. And now he explains what he means. He says if you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you'll never have enough. Never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Another example: worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you'll always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally plant you. In other words, bury you. He says, on one level, we all know this stuff already. It's been codified as myths, proverbs, cliches, bromides, epigrams, parables. He says, the skeleton of every great story. The trick is keeping the truth up front in daily consciousness. Now, it sounds like very wise words, which I indeed think they are. David Foster Wallace was a very successful American author. I'm not entirely sure if he was a Christian, but he unfortunately committed suicide at the age of 46. And I was wondering, after writing such an insightful piece, or I think it was part of a speech that he delivered somewhere, I was wondering what was going on in his heart that caused him to give up on life. If, according to his logic, which I think is correct, that everyone worships, then what was he worshiping that didn't give him hope and meaning to continue in life? It just emphasizes our point. You are what you worship. Therefore, it's so important that we get our worship right. We want to worship something that is going to give us life and not take life from us, either literally or metaphorically. So for that, let's look at the wise men in our Christmas story as they came seeking Jesus. Have a look at chapter 2 from verse 1. It says, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. So firstly, who are these wise men? They're also known as the Magi. And so they were from the east, especially or specifically from the Medo-Persian Empire. And they were described as priests, but they were into some weird stuff like astronomy and astrology, and some others say into some sort of cultic practices. But when the Medo-Persian Empire invaded Babylon way back in the Old Testament in 539 BC in June, if you're taking notes, they came across the Jews who had been taken captive by the Babylonians. And it's said that these magi, or these group of priestly people, they became quite acquainted with the Jewish scriptures or our Old Testament. And in the Old Testament, there is prophecy after prophecy of this coming king or this coming Messiah or Christ who would reign not just over the Jews, but over all people, and his kingdom would never end. And these particular wise men, these particular magi, they're seeing the signs of this. But how? Well, look what they say in verse 2. They say, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." So they know the King of the Jews has been born, not because anyone has told them, but because of the star that they've seen. So this star is critical because it's told them that the true King has been born, and it results in them traveling hundreds and hundreds of miles to worship him. And so we can say they're starting to get their worship right. So what is it about this star? Well, all our children's Christmas stories and movies depict it as a real star. Some say it was Jupiter, because apparently Jupiter is known as the king of the planets. Others say that Jupiter and Saturn got together somehow in the shape of a fish. We're not too sure. I would prefer to go with a safer, more biblical option, one that will help us begin to get our worship correct. You see, these wise men weren't the only ones to see a sign that was in the sky. Have a look at this, Luke chapter 2, verse 9. "And an angel of the Lord appeared to them," that's the shepherds, "and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were filled with great fear." Okay, so let's just take note of that. God's glory was shining all around them. John MacArthur explains it like this. He says, if you go back into the Old Testament and you study the concept of the glory of God, you will find that the glory of God is manifest as light. Over and over again in the Old Testament, the glory of God is manifest as light. When God radiates his presence, he transforms it into ineffable light. And he's right. Remember when God was leading the Israelites out of Egypt from slavery to the promised land in Canaan, he led them during the day with a cloud of light, and at night it was a pillar of fire. When Moses wanted to see God's glory, God had to hide him in the cleft of a rock, and he could only see the back of God. And even still, when he came down from the mountain, his face was lit up, so much so that he had to put a veil over his head. And then when Jesus is transfigured on the mountain in front of Peter, James, and John, Matthew 17 verse 2 tells us his face shone like the sun and his clothes became as white as light. And so biblically speaking, when it says that these wise men saw the star rise in the east or from the east, I believe God was leading them with his glory as he had done so for so many others throughout history. So, what on earth does that have to do with us and us getting our worship right? Everything. Because if it's true that we become what we worship, then imagine if we can see the glory of God. The wise men saw the glory of God, and it led them to this profound realization that the true king had been born. And then it produced in them a resolute desire to worship him. So imagine if you and imagine if we can see the glory of Jesus. And that's the cool thing about Christmas, is we don't have to imagine. Look at this. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18. Paul writes and he says, "And we all," who's the we? Those of us who have been born again, spiritually regenerated. "And we all, with unveiled face," very interesting, "beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image, from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit." So notice how Paul reaches back to Moses, who had to cover his face. We don't. So something has changed. Moses was under the old covenant. He was under the law. We're under the new covenant, which is under grace, which Jesus came to establish. But can you see our principle here? You become what you worship, or you become what you behold. This is our definition of worship. As we behold, which is just way more intense than just saying, "Hey, just have a look at this." No, as we gaze or as we are almost transfixed by the glory of the Lord, we will become more and more like Jesus. This refers to our sanctification. Sanctification just simply means to be set apart. We have been set apart
by God, for God, and beginning to reflect Him more and more. So the all-important question for you and I then is, well, how? How do we behold the glory of the Lord? We don't have a cloud of light during the day, or a pillar of fire at night, or a chorus of holy angels giving us the latest update on Jesus. So how do we glory in the gloriousness of Jesus so as to become more like Him? Well, Paul tells us, he says, for this comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. How incredible is that? The one we are to be holding is the one who enables us to then do the beholding. He, by the Spirit, gives us spiritual faculties. He gives us spiritual eyes to see His glory. And then in seeing His glory, our journey of becoming more and more like Him begins. John Piper, who I think is the preeminent scholar on the glory of God, he says this. He says, this means that beholding the glory of the Lord involves a change, right? If we're going to behold the Lord and we're going to become more like Him, then what's going to happen to us? What's going to happen in us? He tells us it involves a change of heart, a change of desires and preferences, so that the Lord is seen not just as true, but also as precious, beautiful, valuable, desirable, satisfying, the greatest treasure one could ever want. That's worship. If we can worship Jesus like that, then not only will this Christmas be unparalleled, but so will our lives. But then Piper goes on to deliver a punch in the gut. It certainly was for me. He says this: if the eyes of our hearts still see Him as boring, inferior, unattractive, or unreal, we are not beholding the glory of the Lord as Paul means it. Anyone else feel a bit of a convicting punch? And listen, this can be tricky to discern sometimes. I'm not talking about, getting all excited and glorying every time you see a Dodge Challenger or 1968 Ford Mustang. No, it's way more subtle than that. It's like glorying in preaching rather than in the one you should be, who you're preaching about. Or glorying in all that you have, in glorying in all of our accomplishments, rather than glorying in the one who gave us all those things, all those abilities and those gifts. So what's up with that? Well, just like these wise men came to find and worship the true king, there is another insecure, jealous king who's not willing to give up his throne and adoration. So let's look at this literally, and then we'll look at it from a spiritual point of view. So to have a real Christmas firstly means glorying in the right glory, Jesus, but that also means we then need to fight off the glory of self. So point number 2, we need to put off the glory of self. Here comes our antagonist. Verse 3, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. And they told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet. And here's the prophecy. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. Here we go. For from you shall come a ruler, this is what made Herod uncomfortable, who will shepherd my people Israel. In other words, you will be the king of the Jews. Now let me tell you about Herod. Let's just say he was a little bit off center and incredibly insecure. He had been put in charge of Judea, that was his jurisdiction, and he had been put in charge by the Romans, who were large and in charge at that time. And so in one sense, he was the king of the Jews, but like I said, very, very insecure, and he would do whatever it would take to stay in power and stay in control. Historical writings tell us that he murdered his one wife, Miriam I, because he grew suspicious of her loyalty, even though history tells us he was deeply fond of her. He then subsequently killed his mother-in-law as well. Apparently, he also executed at least 3 of his own sons because he was suspicious that they were plotting to overthrow him at various times. And all of this caused the Roman Emperor Augustus to famously say, "It is better to be a pig than one of Herod's sons," meaning you are likely to live longer as one of Herod's livestock than being a member of his family. So now you can imagine these wise men rolling into Jerusalem asking about where the King of the Jews had been born. And according to the original Greek construct, that they were insistent, that they were kind of like filling the streets with this inquiry as to where this king had been born. And now you can understand why verse 3 says that this not only troubled the madman Herod, but also the whole of Jerusalem, even though it's good news for them. It's like they're saying, okay, just dial it down, guys. You're going to get us in trouble. And they're like, no, but this is good news for you. Where's your king? Where's he been born? And they're like, yeah, it sounds wonderful, but you need to keep quiet because you're going to get us killed. So again, what does this have to do with us and our worship and Christmas? Well, Tim Keller explains it so well. He says this: according to the Bible, the evil of the world ultimately stems from self-centeredness, self-righteousness, self-absorption of every human heart. Each of us wants the world to orbit around us and our needs and desires. We do not want to serve God or our neighbor. We want them to serve us. In every heart, he says this, then there is a little King Herod that wants to, excuse the spelling there, that wants to rule and that is threatened by anything that may compromise its omnipotence and sovereignty. Each of us wants to be the captain of our own soul, the master of our own fate. And so that's why we're arguing in this point that if we want to truly experience a supernatural, real Christmas, then we need to put off the glory of self and truly seek the glory of Jesus. Now, some of us might want to argue with that, want to argue with Keller and go, well, hey, listen, I'm not a little Herod. I seek after God. Well, in his book, Hidden Christmas, which I highly recommend, it's just a little book, thin book, he goes on to say how we can seek God, but from a very self-centered way. And he says the first way we seek God is as gold diggers. You become friends with someone or you marry someone because of their money. Well, people seek God for love and strength and happiness and prosperity and health, but not actually God himself. They want the benefits of God without God. They want the benefits of being in his kingdom without truly worshiping and submitting to him as their king. And again, it's very subtle. But over time, they will most likely leave the faith. They will leave the church. And the reason why, as Keller says, because their lives were not as they wanted, and God was not answering their prayers. The second way we seek God from a place of self-centered glory is seeking God as you want him to be. And when we do this, we're basically just looking for ways to justify reasons to continue living the way we want to live, or to justify the desires that we have. And normally the Bible won't play a very big role in this person's life because they're afraid to see something that will convict them of their lifestyle or their view of God. So what do? How do we put off the self-centered glory seeking that even seeks to use God to reinforce it? Well, firstly, we need to do some introspection. So if you're here this morning or maybe you're watching online and you would consider yourself maybe still, checking Christianity out, or maybe you're still atheistic in your views, then consider this statement from Keller. He says this: no one is really neutral about whether Christmas is true. He says, if the Son of God was really born in a manger, listen to this, then we have lost the right to be in charge of our lives. If it's true,
we have lost the right to be in charge of our lives because he's the Son of God. He says, who can be objective about a claim like that? If it is true, it means you have lost control of your life. He says you can't be. So keep that in mind if you don't believe in Christianity. He says, question your doubts. And I found that fascinating that he says that. Question your doubts. So have you ever stopped to ask, well, why do I have doubts? Or why do I want my doubts regarding Christianity to be true? That's what we need to get to. Why is there this desire to prove Christianity wrong? Is it because we're afraid of what the implications might be for our lives? Are you afraid to relinquish control of your life? My suspicion is a lot of it has to do with morality. You know, if I've been living a certain way and I know that Christianity or the Bible contradicts that or does not approve, and then if God is real and true, well, then that means I'm in a lot of trouble. But as we saw last week in chapter 1 of Matthew, Jesus came to save us from our sins. He came to take the full penalty of our sins upon himself so that we might be forgiven and reconciled to our Heavenly Father. Or maybe another reason is because you've experienced a lot of pain and a lot of suffering in life, and so you question, how can there be a good God? How can God allow bad things to happen? Again, well, let's look at what Jesus came to do. He came to suffer, and he came to die in our place, so that at some point in history, or unless we go be with him beforehand, he will return and usher in glory, which the book of Revelation describes as a place where there will be no more pain, no more suffering, no more death. Revelation 21 verse 4 tells us. Jesus will eventually restore all things. He is making all things new. Revelation 21 verse 5. Go read it for yourself. It's the most amazing passage. Most amazing passage of hope. And so he has come. Christmas is about him coming to show us the way to this newness through faith in him. So question your doubts. Question your doubts and consider what Christianity is actually saying. Some introspection for the Christian. Why do we still struggle with glorying in self? Why can't we simply and purely worship Jesus? Why do we get so distracted? Why is it easier to behold the glory of ourselves or the glory of someone else or the glory of something else and not the sovereign Son of God? Even if we've been given the Holy Spirit to help us see and behold the glory of Jesus, why do we still struggle? Again, as Keller says, we still have a little King Herod in us. There's like this little residual anger and this little residual hostility in us toward God. I was cleaning out a drain the other day, and I was using drain cleaner, and I was using a plunger, and the more I was plunging, the more this gross stuff was just coming out. It was horrendous. But the more I did it, eventually the less stuff was coming out, and the easier the water could then flow. But I know there's some dark spots and places in that drain that I could not get to, or the drain fluid couldn't get to. And so I know over time there's going to be a build up again. And I'm going to have to come again with the plunger and the fluids kind of stuff and all that kind of drain cleany stuff. And I'm going to have to plunge it out all over again. And there is a moldy patch of Herod in each of us that likes to build up every now and again. But we have some pretty powerful drain cleaner. The Holy Spirit is at work. He's helping us behold the glory of Jesus so that we will be slowly transformed. We also have a pretty good plunger in God's Word that can help us see our sin, open our eyes to our sin, and also help us fix our gaze on the glory of Jesus. And let's not forget, we have each other. We have each other to help keep each other accountable in this walk of ours. But a day is coming when Jesus will return. Christmas is all about celebrating the first advent, but a second advent is coming. And when he returns, we will be completely transformed. A completely new drainage system, which I realize now is a horrible illustration, but we will have new bodies, new minds, new hearts. We will be exactly like our Savior. In the meantime, what do? Especially in light of Christmas. Last point, we need to walk in worshipful obedience. Glory in the right thing, put off the wrong glory, and then walk in worshipful obedience. And what we're going to see in the rest of the account is how Herod walked in obedience to his object of worship, the wise men theirs, and even Joseph. Because what you are glorying in will result in your obedience. Or we can say, your obedience is simply the fruit of what you are making much of in life, or what is the center of your life. You will obey that. So take Herod, for example. If you are going to glory in your own power and control, then you are going to have to obey and apply deceptive means to stay that way, to stay in control. As verse 7 says, Herod summoned the wise men secretly and then lied to them about wanting to worship Jesus as well. He said, hey, as soon as you find him, so go off to Bethlehem. As soon as you find him, send word to me so that I too can come and worship the true king. And unfortunately, we know how that part of the story ends. The murder of so many children. And you can almost sense Herod's anxiety and his paranoia here. That's because we were never designed to worship ourselves. We make horrible gods to worship because we know deep down we actually don't have that much power and control over our own lives or the lives of others. And so as a result of that, we always overreact. In this case, issuing the murder of innocent children. And you just look back over world history and you can see this overreaction because we're actually not in control. So much power is all about being or manifested in insecurity. But then in complete contrast are those who see the glory of Jesus and are being transformed by it. They're not only being transformed by it, but they're being led by it. In other words, it becomes the means and the grounds for how we live and why we live. Look at verse 9. And behold, the star that they had seen, the wise men, when it rose, went before them. Okay, so it's leading them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. And what happens when you are led by the glory of God? When you fix your gaze upon him and you're led by it, what is the result? Look at verse 10. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. You see the emotions? You see the posture? You see the fruit? They see the Son of God. When we walk in worshipful obedience of the glory of God, we will feel a deep-rooted sense of joy and peace because of it. That comes with it. We see the Son of God now in the eyes of our hearts in a spiritual sense, but one day we will see him with our physical eyes and we too will fall down in adoration. Notice too, they're walking in worshipful obedience of Jesus dispels the fear of man. Look at verse 12. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. So the wise men, they did not obey Herod's instruction to return to him. They obeyed God's instruction to go another way. They feared the Lord, not man. Joseph too, in obedience, he took his family to Egypt until the self-glorifying, insecure Herod had passed away. So sunrise, if we want to have a real Christmas, we too need to worship correctly. Put our worship in the right place. We need eyes to see the all-supreme beauty and glory of Jesus. So imagine this with me, and then we're done. Have a look at this waterfall with me. And imagine that you're there. This apparently is in Croatia, if anyone wants to know some Christmas traveling. It's in Croatia. So imagine you're there, and you're standing ankle deep in this water on the edge. And you're about to dive into this pool. And you just take a moment, and you can hear the birds chirping, and the birds singing in the forest around you, and you can smell that forest air and the breeze against your skin. And you take it in, you take a deep breath, and you say to yourself, this place is so privileged to have me standing here. No. We're in awe, right? Some of us might stand there transfixed in absolute silence. Others of us are jumping up and down because we can't contain ourselves in seeing all of this beauty. None of us wants to leave. And we're all profoundly changed by this beauty that we are beholding. But you're seeing creation through your physical eyes. Now imagine seeing your Creator with your spiritual eyes. I want us to trust the Lord to do that. To open our spiritual eyes more and more to see the infinite worth and beauty of Jesus. So here's my challenge for you this week. 3 practical things. Number 1, every time you open your Bibles this week, would you ask Him to show you something amazing about Him so that your heart can glory in Him? And as you go out and about this coming week, ask Him to give you eyes to behold His glory in creation, even in other people. So as you crack open your Bibles to see His glory in His Word, that's specific revelation. And then as you're driving around, as you're on 7 Mile, and you're beholding His creation, that's a general revelation, all contributing to seeing Him as glorious. And then lastly, to redeem some of our Christmas decorations and celebrations. Every time you see a star on top of a Christmas tree, would you just whisper a little prayer? Lord, would you lead me? Would you continue to lead me by your glory so that I might be more and more transformed by it? Christmas will become more real because He will become more glorious and you will be transformed by it. Let's pray together.